Yeah, the obsession with scale, which is partly something you can blame the VCs for, is like businesses in Europe classically, you just have like one manufacturer of Parmesan cheese that makes the best Parmesan cheese in their region of Italy for 500 years, right? Or a
Zildjian
winemaker.
Cymbals has been in business since the 11th century.
Yeah.
And that's a great business.
And like we don't tend to appreciate that type of business in America as much, especially in the content, to bring it back to our field, right? I think VCs tend to analogize media startups like tech companies when it's more like running a restaurant, right?
Yeah.
You can run one really nice restaurant. If you're very lucky, you can even franchise that to a couple of locations, and you can write a cookbook, and you can do one, Iron Chef or whatever. But there's not like this 100x scale unless you want to be Chipotle or something, which is fine, right?
Yeah, or you spin off Shake Shack from Danny Meyer's thing.
Yeah,
but it's not part of the same.
Danny, there are exceptions, right? To everything, David Chang or Danny Meyer, right, are people that have managed to kind of keep a high quality product, and they have their flagships and they have their expansion, but they're kind of like once in a generation geniuses, pretty much.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting point. Like the New York Times is a family-owned company, and that's
interesting.
It's publicly traded, but family-owned, and that check balance has worked. Although the Washington Post is in trouble because it's just all owned by one guy.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're probably moving toward winner take all in everything, right? And the Times, I think, is becoming like a winner take all media company. But to their credit, they have become. I had kind of a bad falling out with the Times when I left, right? But they brought me back in to and do op-eds with them and be in their podcasts and things like that. And so, they're not holding a grudge because they're like, we're the best media brand in the world right now. And we're not going to worry about having grudges if it makes our product better. And we have more interesting content. So I think, they become a uniquely well-run business, I think. But it's also like the treadmill of human capital or the accelerator of human capital, where once you start to do well, then you develop better context and hire better talent, right? And then at some point it stops. I mean, the reason why the Xerox Corporation didn't become the dominant Google of today is because you do develop these encumbrances where, the founders lose their motivation. And then, with every node of management that you add, then you just become a lot slower about things. And I'm thinking about this stuff because this newsletter is now doing kind of insanely well. And I have, one part-time employee, and then my partner helps out de facto 2 part-time employees, basically, right? And we're beating all these companies with 30 employees and things like that. And it's
the discipline to not scale is actually really interesting. Like Machiavelli talks about not going past. No, Robert Greene talks about it via Machiavelli. But the idea of not going past the mark you aimed for, and just be like, I wanted to run a newsletter. I wasn't trying to start a multimedia company, and to I've had to really go I want this to just be about this big, and to put a ceiling on what you're doing. To turn down money is a really hard thing, especially if a VC person is offering you no strings attached money. But there are strings attached.
No, it's so I call it the dessert analogy, where you'll go in and you have your dinner, and you're like, I'm not going to have dessert. I know how to satiate myself with my main course, right? But the person selling dessert, i.e. the waiter, they know that you're kind of full, and they know how to say, here's a dessert that sounds light. It's just some strawberries and cream or something, right? Or why don't you indulge? Yeah. Why don't you deserve it? I know that it's an indulgence, but now it's time to indulge. Or there's something fruity, or so they always kind of are savory.
You're going to feel bad afterwards, but you can't
so you have to be prepared for the fact that people. It's whenever there's a big scandal where everyone's emails get leaked at Sony Corporation or something. It's my expectations, there's probably some pretty bad shit in there, right? Yeah. So the fact that you identify some particular bad shit doesn't really change my priors very much. But
yeah. To just be hey, I'm willing to stay. WeWork is a really good idea. Yeah, it's not a $40 billion idea, for sure. And it shouldn't be in every city, and they don't need 50 buildings in every city. But so the discipline to be I'm going to have an extremely profitable, interesting. That takes a lot of discipline, especially if you're surrounded by lots of people who don't have discipline.
Yeah, maybe you need some VC firms that focus on that. I mean, maybe Y Combinator is kind of a little bit there. They seem to be more okay with.
But they're investing really early, hoping to become one of
yeah.
those companies, and then their 1% becomes worth like $1 trillion.
But yeah, it's hard. I mean, this is one of the things too, is like the inevitability in a capitalist system where people are in an independent-minded country, like the inevitability is that there's going to be competition, and you can't turn that off, and so you may as well compete, figure out what you want, but you may as well compete, or you just get trampled, right? Or just you're just screwed. It's a capitalist system, kind of in an evolutionary way. Attempts to rein that in inherently don't seem to work well and or substantially lower human welfare.
But to go to your casino metaphor, you have to have the ability to win money and then walk away.
Yeah, which most people don't.
Because you know it's going to go away if you don't.
Yeah, yeah.
That's the heart. Yeah. The other thing I thought was interesting, you were talking about this in the book, like, because there's lots to critique in The Village, but the idea of peer review or a culture of criticism. I was on this text thread with a bunch of like some of the people in your book, and the degree to which they were always complaining about media coverage of them that they interpreted as extremely negative, which a normal person like me would go, no, your company's worth $8 billion. This is this is actually very nice coverage. This is the expected coverage when you are not the underdog anymore. Yeah. And so that you noted that there is kind of a culture of like, we're all supposed to root for each other. And that's not one, how the world works, nor is it ultimately the way the world should work. No,
when you go from underdog to established incumbent, I mean, that can switch very quickly, right? Yes. And I've experienced that. And you see people turn on you, not in a personal way. I mean, I have loyal friends and I'm loyal to my friends, but the kind of general zeitgeist, whatever you want to call it,
you're not Nate, you're a news story now.
Yeah. So Garrett Adelstein's a poker player who was involved in this famous scandal where he accused another player of cheating, right? And he was like beloved, and he's a sensitive guy, right? He's talked about his battles with depression and things like that. And he's like, I couldn't handle with now being perceived as the villain because I went maybe overboard in accusing a player who might have cheated before there was proof. And like that's very difficult.
Yeah. Yeah. Like the idea that Silicon Valley, it's like you guys are all rooting for each other, not because it's like this like love of the weird and the innovative or whatever. It's that you're all invested in each other, and there's some element of a hype, like a pump and dump thing that's going on here. That's accusing them of criminality in a way that they're not. But they are all incentivized to inflate the valuations of their companies, and then they're like surprised that the New York Times or random like a 20-something, reporter in New York City who's just tweeting about stuff is not equally incentivized to help them inflate the values of their company. Of course, it's like they're doing their job, and the inability to grasp that, and then also to see the good that comes from, like, if Silicon Valley had been exposed to more criticism internally, maybe the WeWork thing doesn't happen.